Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges of conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding 2 years after the January 6 riot at the US Capitol. Prosecutors say they have enough evidence to hold the former president criminally responsible. His next hearing is on August 28 and the trial expected to run through the next presidential election campaign. Joining me live is Republican strategist John Jordan. John, I don't think we've ever seen, a very good morning to you, our time at this point, but I don't think we've ever seen a landscape quite like this, this close to an election.
No, we haven't. It is unprecedented. Here you have President Trump under indictment. You have President Biden now in a scandal involving his son and possible bribery. So this may well be a race between the impeached President Biden against the indicted President Trump. But it's strange days politically, to be sure. Absolutely.
All right, let's have a look at some of the other Republican candidates, and I just want to get a few of your observations on these individuals. Of course, on this first page, probably those with a better chance than the second page. You can see them there: Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so even the people on the first page, the so-called top-tier candidates, Mike Pence, Governor DeSantis, and Nikki Haley, and don't seem to be getting any traction. So this looks like it's President Trump's nomination to lose, and there's all kinds, we get into the legal stuff and the political stuff if you wish. But it looks like if somebody's going to knock him out of the nomination, it's going to have to be somebody else. Republican voters have looked at all of these candidates, and they just don't seem to be buying it. There's one name that I would have everybody watch out for that's not in this race right now, and that is the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. He's neither a never Trumper nor is he full MAGA. He's liked and accepted by all parties. And if he jumps in, he could be formidable. There's a poll that came out this week that showed he would beat Biden by 7 points in Virginia. And that's a recent election's been a blue state, and it's a pretty good sized one, too. So if Glenn Youngkin gets in, that may have the potential to shake up the race.
Because it's a reasonably common held view that Donald Trump could well get the Republican candidacy, but to try to win the election would be very, very difficult with, say, 25% of the Republican Party not wanting him, and then it's going to be a lot harder at the general election.
No, that's certainly the narrative in the American media, but it isn't borne out by the data. There was a poll done this week by the New York Times, which is no friend of President Trump at all. They were one of the leaders of the Russia collusion thing that went sour a few years ago. And it showed that the race is dead even. And there's other polls that show this too. President Biden's got problems. He is leaking a significant number of black men. Sure, he's going to win all of them, most of them, but he's leaking enough. He's leaking Hispanics, and he is leaking working class white voters by in significant numbers. President Trump's voters are going to show up for sure, and they are enraged by this, but he's perceived by many, including me, as politically driven and legally insufficient and legally laughable claims by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor. And I myself am a lawyer and researched the law on this extensively and have tried a lot of cases. So no, it's the media narrative that President Trump would have difficulty in the general, but that isn't borne out by reams of data. And I just refer everybody out there to realclearpolitics.com, which is a compendium of polls done by all sides. And it really shows that this race is a horse race. And even Politico, Washington Post, and publications that are hostile to President Trump are recognizing that this is going to be very, very close, and President Trump has an even money chance of winning.
Oh, they're crazy times. They really are. Now, let's have a change of subject, because you have a military background as well. We saw some very top brass from the United States here in Australia recently. It looks like we've never had a closer link, our two countries.
No, we haven't, and that's kind of the way it should be. And to say that we've never been closer, that's really saying something, considering how close our two countries are and the wars we've fought side by side. America is committed to defending Australia. In fact, all of the Southeast countries in Southeast Asia, and is committed to the Quad, which is the Japan, India, the United States, and Australia, and ensuring that these sea lanes are open and that China isn't able to threaten them and threaten the economies of those four countries. And that includes the AUKUS submarine deal, the nuclear submarine transaction, which I think is a great idea. But we are clearly all together in this, and it's really upsetting Beijing. Beijing is particularly upset that there is now going to be a NATO office in Tokyo. Collectively, the Quad, all of us together, are strong enough to be able to ensure that the sea lanes remain open for everybody and that China isn't able to impose its will throughout the region.
What do you make of the relationship between the United States and China?
We're in a Cold War. Let's not pretend we're not. China is continuing its robust whole of government, whole of nation activities against the United States, whether it's buying farmland next to sensitive military bases, opening Chinese police stations inside the United States, spy balloons going over sensitive military installations. Until the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, gets serious and decides to impose costs on China for these activities, they're only going to become more brazen. But right now, it seems that the administration is more interested in some sort of strange, climate deal with China, when in fact China is the number one polluter in the world, than it is in imposing costs on them. That's why there was a meeting between Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm and the Chinese Communist Party this week, because it seems that the administration wants some sort of pretend environmental deal rather than imposing real costs on China for what they're doing inside the United States. I'd like to add that 60,000 Americans a year die of fentanyl poisoning and drug poisoning, and these base chemicals are coming from China and across the U.S. southern border. But the administration just isn't serious about this sort of thing, and the Chinese administration, Beijing, is just all too happy to continue these malign activities.
Let's have a look at the Ukraine and Russia. Alexei Navalny yesterday copped another 19 years, and two hits on a Russian tanker this morning, and we also saw another vessel hit yesterday by Ukrainian drones. What do you make of it all?
Well, Ukraine is making it clear that the Moskva was not the end of it when they sunk the Russian flagship, that they're going to be a threat to the Russian Navy throughout the Black Sea, and that they're not going to put up with a grain embargo, or which is what's going to happen, especially what the Russians want to happen after they withdrew from the grain deal. The Ukrainian offensive in the south continues. There is now kind of a media blackout inside of Russia, so it's kind of harder to get more objective information from the Russian side. As a Russian speaker, this has been my bread and butter for a long time, so that's a disappointment. But the Ukrainians do appear to be gaining ground and have reached another set of Russian defenses in the south. The Russians have launched an offensive near Avdiivka, which has largely failed, but it looks like Russia is taking a lot more losses they're inflicting on the Ukrainians, and it remains to be seen, can the Ukrainians really take advantage of this before the rainy season hits?
What do you think will happen with Navalny?
That poor guy. Mr. Navalny, Alexei Navalny, was given yet another 19 years by a Russian court this last week, and it looks like he won't get out of prison until and unless there's a regime change in Russia. Navalny is more of a rallying cry for the West than he is actually inside of Russia. He's not particularly popular or particularly well liked inside of Russia. It's somewhere between dislike and indifference. He's not really the potent political force there that the West seems to think he is. Any change in Russia, sadly, is going to come from inside the security services, inside of the military, when they believe that economically and politically the war in Ukraine becomes untenable, especially with its concomitant economic costs.
It almost is untenable, isn't it, John? It looks shambolic from where we are all looking from.
I'm sorry?
It virtually is untenable, isn't it? I'm asking you that question. From where you're sitting, where I'm sitting, it looks a complete shambles.
Yeah, so the question becomes, at what point does the Russian public hit a boiling point? And that is going to, yeah, the key to understanding that is Russian economics. Now, Russian state economic figures are distorted, but it does appear, and there's objective evidence of this with the fall of the ruble to March 2022 lows, that the economic situation in Russia is deteriorating. When the Russian leadership and the Russian security services begin to fear widespread Russian unrest or mutiny, again, another mutiny inside of the Russian military, they may be compelled to act. So look for signs from the ground up, because it's from the bottom up. Those are from whence the pressures will come, and that will cause the security service to act. But it looks like when that happens, there'll be more of a cosmetic change in the Kremlin that's designed to preserve the current system rather than some sort of broader democratic movement.
Finally, looking back inside the United States, domestically, inflation numbers looking a lot better?
I'm sorry?
The inflation numbers in the United States, economically, the US looking a lot better than they did, say, a month ago.
Yeah, great question. The jury's still out on this. The jobs numbers came in about 30,000 jobs less than estimates, which is good, which indicates a cooling labor market. But there's still an awful lot of liquidity in the American system. I mean, keep in mind the American government has spent over $6 trillion since COVID and continues to run trillion-dollar deficits. Until the administration is serious about bringing down spending, these interest rates will have to continue going up, and the threat of inflation will continue. Right now, the American Federal Reserve is kind of fighting the Biden administration. The Biden administration wants to continue spending money at unsustainable levels, and that's forcing the Fed to constantly raise rates to offset that. Eventually, something's going to have to give here. I'm not sure that the inflation dragon is slain. We'd have to see a lot more data on this, and I think you're in line for at least another 25 basis point increase in the federal funds rate at the September meeting.
Yeah, we'll watch with interest. Good to talk, John. It's been a while.
Look forward to having me back soon.